Hey, you know how sometimes things happen with immigration policy that just, well, kept you off guard?
Definitely.
There was this legal ruling recently. It affects a really large group of people who actually came here legally. And honestly, the situation feels a bit like a curveball.
Yeah, I saw that. It really makes you think about the complexities, doesn't it?
It does, about how these policies work, or maybe sometimes don't work as expected.
Absolutely. We're talking about, what, over 500,000 people?
Yeah?
People who followed the process, came here under a specific program, and now suddenly their status is, well, it's up in the air because of this legal fight.
Right. It's like the rules changed mid-game. So that's what we want to unpack in this deep dive. We've looked into the details, the program itself, the ruling.
hmm
Our mission here is really just to lay it all out clearly, what exactly is happening, and why it's a pretty big deal.
Good plan. Because it can get confusing fast.
Yeah.
So the core issue is a federal judge stepping in.
Exactly. A judge blocked the Trump administration's move to basically end the legal status for migrants from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela.
The ones who came in under that specific Biden-era program.
Yeah, that one. So maybe we should start there with that program, the CHNV program, I think it's called.
Makes sense. CHNV stands for Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela.
Okay. So what was the deal with it? How did it work?
Well, think of it as a specific pathway. Instead of, trying other routes, people from these four countries could apply to fly directly to the U.S. legally.
Fly directly. Okay.
But there was a key piece. They needed a sponsor here in the States.
A sponsor? Like financially responsible.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Someone could be a person, could be a group who basically agreed to support them when they arrived, once they had that sponsor approved.
Then they could get on a plane.
Then they could fly in and enter legally. It was designed as a more orderly process.
Okay, that sounds quite different from how we usually hear about border entries. How many people actually use this?
The numbers are pretty striking. Over 532,000 people.
Wow, over 500,000. That's significant.
It really is. A huge number who use this specific legal pathway.
And what status did they get when they arrived? Was it like a green card or
No, not permanent residency. They were given something called immigration parole,
parole?
which essentially meant they were allowed to be here legally, and, importantly, they could apply for work authorization
For how long?
for 2 years
3
initially.
years. So it was always meant to be temporary.
That was the framework, yes. Not a path to a green card in itself, but a lawful status for that period.
And why did the Biden administration set this up? What was the thinking behind it?
Twofold, really. One was to provide a legal, safer alternative for people from these countries facing difficult situations.
Right.
And the second related goal was to try and reduce the number of irregular crossings at the southern border. Offer a different option.
Okay. Create a legal channel. Maybe fewer people try to cross without authorization. Makes sense. Were there any catches or limits to it?
Yeah, a couple of things. The Biden administration did pause the program for a bit in 2024.
Oh, where?
Concerns about fraud in some applications, apparently.
Okay.
And crucially, that 2-year parole wasn't automatically renewable. People knew coming in they'd likely need to find another legal basis to stay long-term, like asylum or maybe TPS if eligible.
Got it. So, a temporary bridge. Okay, let's jump forward. The Trump administration returns in January. What was their view on this CHNV program?
They moved pretty quickly to dismantle parole-based policies like this one.
Why? What was their argument against it?
Their main points were, one, that using parole authority on this scale went beyond what the president is legally allowed to do.
Exceeded authority, okay.
And two, they raised concerns about vetting. They argued that people admitted weren't properly screened.
Not properly vetted. That's a serious claim. What do they mean by that?
The specifics weren't fully detailed in what we saw, but the implication was that the background checks weren't rigorous enough, potentially posing security or public safety risks.
So, legally questionable and potentially risky, in their view. What did they actually do about it?
They issued a directive, basically told the CHNV recipients they had 30 days to leave the U.S. voluntarily.
30 days? Wow. Or else what?
Or face arrest and deportation. They specifically mentioned prioritizing those who hadn't applied for other immigration benefits, like asylum.
That's incredibly disruptive for potentially hundreds of thousands of people.
Absolutely. And it wasn't quiet. The Department of Homeland Security, DHS, put out a statement.
What did they say?
Well, the DHS spokeswoman, Krisha McLaughlin, used some very strong language.
Yeah.
She said the policy had, and I'm quoting roughly here, unleashed over 530,000 poorly vetted aliens into America, fueling crime and stealing jobs.
Oof. fueling crime and stealing jobs. That's a stark contrast to the Biden admin's rationale.
Very stark. And she also mentioned rampant fraud associated with the program.
It really shows the completely different perspectives on this, doesn't it?
Night and day. Which brings us to the judge's intervention.
Right. Judge Indira Talwani in Boston, what was her ruling?
She issued what's called a preliminary injunction, basically a temporary halt.
Halting what exactly?
Halting the Trump administration's plan to terminate the legal parole status of these migrants immediately. That April 24th deadline they set. Put on hold.
So, no mass termination of status for now.
Correct.
Yeah.
And she also suspended the deportation warnings the government had started sending out.
Okay. And what was her reasoning? Why did she block it?
Her core argument was about process. She said, you can't just terminate the legal status of such a huge group en masse without individual review.
Individual review?
Yeah. She emphasized that these people had complied with the DHS program. They entered lawfully based on the rules at the time. To just pull the rug out from under them without case-by-case justification, she argued, undermines the rule of law itself.
That makes sense. Sort of a fairness argument, due process.
Exactly. It suggests the government needs a stronger, individualized reason to revoke status granted under its own prior programs, especially on this scale.
So this ruling is obviously a huge relief for those affected, a significant reprieve, as the reports called it.
Immense relief, yes. Buys them time, prevents immediate deportation threats.
Now, wasn't this program challenged before? I think you mentioned Republican states.
That's right. Earlier on, while the Biden administration was still running it, some Republican-led states sued.
On what grounds?
Their argument was different. They basically said the whole program was illegal from the start because, in their view, the administration stretched the definition of parole way too far beyond its intended use for individual humanitarian cases.
So one challenge says the program itself was illegal, and this latest ruling focuses on how the termination was being handled.
Precisely. Different legal angles on the same policy. It shows how layered these things are.
And this isn't the only recent pushback against the Trump admin's immigration moves, right? Something about TPS.
Correct. The reporting mentioned another federal judge, this one in California, also recently blocked efforts to end temporary protected status, TPS, for Venezuelans.
So a pattern, maybe? Courts pushing back on attempts to quickly undo prior immigration policies.
It seems that way. It highlights that changing these policies isn't just flipping a switch. There are legal standards and processes that have to be followed, and courts are scrutinizing them.
Which circles back to those clashing viewpoints. Biden admin, legal pathways, managing migration. Trump admin, security risks, improper vetting, impact on jobs.
Exactly. Two fundamentally different ways of looking at the same group of people and the same program.
And Judge Talwani's ruling, for now, emphasizes the due process angle for those who followed the rules as they existed then.
Correct. Even if the current administration disagrees with the underlying policy, the termination process itself has to meet legal standards.
So what's next? Is this the end of the story?
Almost certainly not.
Yeah.
That DHS statement was pretty clear. Secretary Noem intends to use every legal option to end the CHNB policy.
So appeals, other legal moves.
Very likely. We can expect the administration to fight this ruling in higher courts or look for other ways to achieve their goal. This legal battle seems far from over.
Definitely something to keep watching then. Huge implications for so many people, and it really highlights these ongoing tensions in U.S. immigration policy.
For sure, this ruling is a pause, maybe a temporary shield, but the core conflict over the policy and the legal fight continues.
Okay, so let's quickly recap. A federal judge has temporarily stopped the Trump administration from ending the legal status of over 500,000 migrants from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela.
Right, the ones who came under that CHNV parole program.
And the judge's reasoning hinged on the need for due process, saying you can't just revoke status en masse for people who entered legally under a government program without individual justification.
It's a significant legal setback for the administration's immediate plans, but the fight over the program itself is ongoing.
And it really does make you think about those competing narratives, doesn't it? The push for legal pathways versus the focus on security and vetting.
Absolutely. How do you balance those things? Creating orderly processes versus concerns about who is entering and how it impacts the country.
Yeah. So maybe a final thought for our listeners. As you hear about this playing out, consider those different angles. What does this legal back and forth tell us about the challenges of actually making immigration policy?
And maybe what questions does it raise for you about how these major policies get created and perhaps more critically, how they get undone? It's complex stuff.